Cast today. We are joined by a guest and I'm really excited for this episode because I think this is going to be just a great benefit for so many people. And so, as we get started, Ryan, we're going to talk about TPA, and he's going to tell you everything that you want to know about the Timothy Pastoral Apprenticeship. So if there's people that are thinking about, hey, I want to be a pastor, but I didn't know a path to do that, we're gonna kind of open some doors here that you thought that you never knew existed, right? So I think that's one of the things that I'm really excited about this conversation. So Ryan, would you just take a few minutes here and just tell us a little bit about yourself, your family, introduce us to what TPA is and how you became part of that?
Sure. Yeah. My name is Ryan Franchuk. I live in Baltic, South Dakota, and I'm one of the pastors on staff at River Community Church in Del Rapids, which is 6 miles north of us, just up the road in South Dakota. And I have my family and I have lived in Baltic for 12 years now, and I had been a part of a church plant effort in that town of about 1,000 people, going back all the way to 2009 now. And so I served that church plant for about 8 years until we made the painful decision to close the doors of that church. But it worked such that I was able to kind of come back on staff, pastoral staff at our mothership, River Community Church in Del Rapids. And so that's kind of what I've been doing for the last 12 years or so. I was a youth pastor before that in Emory, South Dakota for 5 years, where I also completed my seminary degree from North American Baptist Seminary in Sioux Falls, which Colt, I understand, is a graduate of that institution too.
Yeah, we crossed paths there, although I can't say I remember crossing paths with you so much. We talked about that before, but actually there was a guy that's in our denomination, Dwayne Deckert. You remember Dwayne?
Boy, yeah, it rings a bell for sure. I can't quite put a face on it. But.
Yeah, he came up to me at an event that we were doing and said, "Hey, we went to seminary together." I'm like, "Yeah, I don't know you." So apparently I was antisocial in seminary.
That was a long time ago. I remember I remember distinctly one conversation I had with you outside of the seminary, and you were kind of like had I think you sort of had a reputation as the campus Calvinist kind of thing.
Okay.
So some of us maybe considered you sort of a trailblazer or something. You had kind of glittery steps everywhere you walked, that sort of deal. And so I remember talking with you and mentioning something about Calvinism or predestination or something, and you said R.C. Sproul is right. We need to start talking about these things, and that's all I remember. So that's it.
Well, boy, if that's the legacy I've left is glittery steps and R.C. Sproul quotes, I'm okay with that. Somehow I don't think that's what everybody remembers. But anyways, moving on.
Yeah.
Let's see. I was trying to think how we had Gavin Retzer on, and Gavin, he went to seminary with us. He lived in our building, so I kind of remember him a little bit more. And we had some connections. Trent Hofer was part of that. He's friends with a lot of the guys that I know around here and in our church. He went to a church just up the road, grew up the road. I ran into him and Gavin at a Desiring God, or whatever it's called now, Bethlehem Pastors Conference a few years ago. And he was telling me all about this program he was in, that Gavin was his mentor. And I had all these questions is this a reputable thing? Is this, is he in a cult, but he's at a Desiring God thing. So I had all these questions in my mind, and as time went on, got in touch with Gavin a little bit and learned a little bit more about that, and eventually got in touch with you, and we had a really good conversation about that. But I really want everybody to hear this. So tell us a little bit about the Timothy Pastoral Apprenticeship, maybe how it came about in your minds.
Sure. Yeah. The Timothy Pastoral Apprenticeship, or TPA for short, is we say it's a radically church-centered theological and ministry training program that aims to prepare men for vocational ministry, or just solid eldership in the church, in the context of the local church, at an absolute minimum of financial burden and cost to the students, and sort of, I guess I like to think of it, maybe somewhat presumptuously, but I like to think of it as almost a different paradigm for training and men for pastoral ministry than sort of our traditional models of sending a guy off to seminary. He earns an MDiv degree or whatever, starts putting his name out there, sending out resumes or whatnot, or getting connected with his denominational heads or that kind of stuff, and then kind of starting the dating process, where you're looking at churches to see if they're interested in you, and vice versa. So the TPA instead tries to recenter the whole experience of being trained for ministry to the local church context by placing students in the TPA at churches that are at a church that's in the TPA network, and that becomes their home church, as it were, for their time in the program. And during their time in the program, then they are invested, we hope, at every level of the life of that local church community, and they get kind of hands-on practical pastoral experience under the watchful mentoring care of their mentor pastor. And so generally, the pastor of that church will be their mentor pastor, and commit to meeting with the student on a weekly and regular basis for discipleship and mutual encouragement, and talking through issues of ministry, and then kind of also helping that student craft an apprenticeship experience. So approximately half of a student's time in the program we envision as being hands-on, kind of get your fingers and hands dirty in the actual stuff of pastoral ministry. So that might look different from church to church and context to context, but in general, that's, getting a man experience in preaching, experience in teaching, experience in discipleship, experience in counseling, experience in visiting people in the hospital, experiencing, sitting in on premarital counseling. How do you do a funeral? How do you do a baptism? What do you say to a family who's grieving the loss of a loved one? How do you, what sorts of practical things does a pastor have to do week in and week out? Well, the TPA says, let's take these guys and let them actually do that stuff, kind of under the watchful care of the mentor pastor and the church itself, and in the context of that church. And so, what are elder meetings like? What sorts of things are elders concerned with? What does the prayer life of the elder team of a church look like? All those sorts of things are things that we're hoping that students, and aiming at students getting experience in when they're in the program. And then, so that's, like I said, approximately half the program. The other half of a student's time in the program then is working through a 60 credit rigorous academic curriculum. And so that's roughly analogous to the sort of academic experience you might get at say, in a traditional seminary. And so we have a series of core classes that we have all our students take that meet in person and online via Zoom we've been doing Zoom a long time now, and we were doing Zoom before it was cool, even before COVID hit. But we've also had a number of students that were kind of centrally located in the Sioux Falls, South Dakota region, and so it's made a lot of sense for us to have a lot of our classes meet in person, and then we connect guys that are at churches that are more geographically distant. We connect them to those classes via Zoom, and those classes we call them symposium classes because we have all our students who want to take that class taking the class at the same time. They're together either in person or connected to the class via Zoom. And it's taught in person by one of the mentor pastors of the TPA network. And so we have a group of directors that a lot of those directors are involved specifically in teaching classes, but we also ask some mentor pastors in the TPA network to kind of become as expert as they can be in a particular field or area of their expertise, and teach a class that fits into that core curriculum. So our core curriculum is systematic theology and preaching and Old Testament and New Testament and Greek and Hebrew and exegesis and church history 1 and 2, and so those comprise kind of a core curriculum that all TPA students work through, and those classes are taught in person by mentor pastors of the program. And so, those run on a kind of a 2-year cycle on a trimester system. And so there's one class that meets per trimester, and it's, about 4 hours on a weeknight. Right now, Tuesday nights is kind of our preferred day and time for symposium classes. And so guys get together and go through 14 weeks of instruction in that area. And the rest of that doesn't make up 60 credit hours. So the rest of that academic curriculum is made up by a schedule of academic electives, we call them. And so those are classes that are largely sort of self-study driven or self-study in style, where there's so much kind of world-class theological education available online for free through some amazing resources that God has really blessed the church with, I feel like, in these days. Things like biblicaltraining.org and some pretty phenomenal seminaries have a lot of their instruction, video and audio lecture available online for free. And so we try to utilize that as much as possible for the purpose of elective classes. So we'll construct a syllabus for a guy for his elective class where, we'll say, all right, you need, say, 14 hours at least 14 hours of lecture. Here's some sources that you might use for that class. You need 500 to 1,000 pages of reading and scholarly literature on that particular subject. Here are some books that you should work through and write papers on, that kind of thing. And so that's how guys kind of make up the rest of the academic component of their elective classes, is working through those classes on their own at their own pace. And a mentor pastor is kind of really pivotal in that process and helping them kind of stay on task and discussing, kind of debriefing what they're learning and studying. But not only that, but we kind of, it's not quite to the degree that I'd like the program to be, but so maybe you'd say this is an aspired value still of the TPA, but we love kind of the relational connectedness aspect of the program too. And so it's not just a student at his mentor pastor out in the middle of nowhere, South Dakota, but that students are really part of the whole network of the TPA. And so that means they're getting to know other pastors, other mentor pastors in the network, other students in the network through their engagement in the classes. And we love the idea of having other mentor pastors have eyes on their work too. And so we have students keep their stuff in a Google Drive repository in a folder structure that they can give sharing level access to other mentor pastors and whoever they want, really, basically to look over their work. And so we kind of envision it as a sort of a communal academic exercise, as well as just between a guy and his mentor pastor. So that's the thing in a nutshell, as it were. And we envision the TPA as a 3-year program, that it would take a guy approximately 3 years to work through all that academic stuff and have enough time to really have grown in his church context and to have gotten the experience necessary or desired to really, sort of be prepared to be launched into the next phase of whatever ministry looks like for him. And again, we sort of envision that as an on-ramp into vocational ministry. So we kind of conceive of it as an alternative to traditional seminary, in that we look to have the academic portion of things rounded out, but coming alongside that, and really a core part of that is that all this is being worked out in the context of a local church. What Jesus died for, his bride, namely the church. It just to us makes sense that if a guy is going to give his life and his life's work and his energy and whatnot to serving that body, then it makes the most sense to have him trained in that body and have that be kind of the bedrock for his studies and his experience.
Yeah, that's really good. I have a question concerning, you also mentioned it can serve the church for solid elder, maybe the guy who's not interested in, at this point anyway, maybe vocational ministry. So maybe the non-vocational elder, the lay pastor. How can this TPA serve that guy?
Yeah, that's something we don't have fleshed out maybe as fully as I'd like it to be quite yet. We're a small program. We have 6 directors. We have 14 churches that are formally part of the TPA network. We have, I believe there's 15 students who are active at some level of the program right now. And so this particular thing comes up in my mind and with our directors and others pretty frequently. And so right now we welcome auditors, we call them, to the kind of the academic side of things, where if we don't just let anybody sit in on a class. Like, we don't envision this sort of as something that churches might open up to their congregation or something. Hey, there's this sweet class on preaching or a New Testament introduction or something that you all should get in on, or that sort of thing. We really kind of value that the collegiality, the ethos of sort of the pastoral sense, I guess, of those classes, but we welcome auditors who, so maybe guys that are wanting to be elders, or wanting to be more educated or more experienced elders. We welcome them if they have a kind of a recommendation from their mentor, from their pastor. We welcome them to sit in on our classes, and if it works for them in their schedule, we ask them to do the same work that the formal TPA students do. And over the years, we've had a number of men that have taken classes in that capacity, or guys that have been sort of proto TPA students. Maybe they're not quite where their pastor would like to see them be, or maybe they're not just at a stage of life where they're ready to kind of dive full bore into pastoral ministry training, but they're really interested in these things and they want to grow and they want to learn. And so we've welcomed a number of guys like that to sit in and take our classes with TPA students, and we're happy to kind of work with them to craft elective class studies that they can work through too. In fact, there's some guys at John's church right now that are working through some elective classwork that they've had syllabi constructed, and they're in the middle of that sort of thing. So from an academic perspective, that's how kind of we like to accommodate those sorts of needs. But there has been a lot of discussion, and I think there's going to continue to be discussion moving forward about if there's a way to sort of programatize isn't really the right word, but sort of make it a little more substantial of a track, a training track or something like that for men who maybe wouldn't think that pastoral ministry or vocational ministry is really what God's calling them to, but they still want to have a sort of a similar training experience.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I'm glad John asked that before I asked this. That this program is primarily geared toward pastors or people that want to train as pastors, and like you said, the traditional method there was to go to seminary. So I would guess if you were part of the Southern Baptist denomination, they would say, wait a minute, our churches do partner with, the education of pastors is in the church context. We have 7 seminaries that we send our people to. And what, I guess my question is what is the need for a program like this when most denominations have a seminary? I think even ours.
Yeah. Yeah.
I said too much. Okay.
This could be a really long, kind of conversation, I suppose, about the philosophy of ministry training. But maybe going back to the very genesis of the TPA about 10 years ago, a number of us who were kind of in on the TPA from the very beginning all had a number of things in common. We had traditional seminary education, and we'd all gone through that. And I'm actually, I'm quite grateful for my time in seminary. I feel like the Lord really used that in some pivotal ways in my life. And I'm grateful for that. And so I don't want to kind of poo-poo traditional seminaries, and just write them off the board completely. Far from it. Right. But one of the things that we reflected on as we got out of seminary and we kind of moved into the next stage of our lives and we're actually doing the work of regular pastoral ministry. One of the things we reflected on was seminary had been great, but it hadn't quite prepared us in a number of key ways for things that we were experiencing, things that we were having questions about, and I think a few of us felt a little bit shortchanged, maybe in some ways, in terms of an emphasis on Bible and theology, and wanting to have kind of the centrality of the Word of God and the love of the local church kind of be at the heart of everything we were doing and thinking about. Maybe we hadn't felt like that had quite been our experience, but one thing more than any other thing probably was a common denominator for those of us who were there at the beginning was we'd all had a figure in our life, a mentor, a pastor who had kind of taken us under his wing at some point and encouraged us in our exploring that potential call to ministry and training and whatnot. And so that more than anything else, we agreed, had really been the foundational, pivotal thing that had energized us for ministry, had prepared us, had trained us, had given us a love for the work, had given us a love for people, had fitted us in some key ways for serving as pastors. So for me, for example, that was a man named Monty Laudenslager, who's passed away now. But when I was a college student at NDSU in Fargo, I got involved with a little Baptist church there called Metropolitan Baptist, which is still going strong today, and I'm grateful for them in so many ways. But their pastor, Monty, the very first weekend that I was around at Metropolitan Baptist, Pastor Monty found out, in talking to me or somehow, that I was a computer science major at NDSU, but I really had my heart kind of set on pastoral ministry. I had my heart set on that for a long time. And when he found that out, he just invited me to hang out with him every Saturday and just talk shop, talk theology, talk ministry, talk church life, talk whatever. And so I think I probably met with him every single Saturday morning that I was around in Fargo, which was most weekends, for 5 years, I bet. And that every single Saturday, and when he kind of, got a feel for my desires and what I felt like God wanted me to do and that kind of thing, he just started putting me into ministry experience context. So he would, let me teach Sunday school. He let me preach. I think he let me preach. This is, probably kind of irresponsible of him, honestly, but I think he let me preach that first year of college without ever having heard me say a word from a pulpit before, or even reading my manuscript or something like that. Like he just invested in me and kind of let me spread my wings in really key ways. He introduced me to folks in the church. He would call me and say, "Hey, I'm going on this hospital visit. You want to come with? Does it fit your schedule right now?" He was a champion for me in church meetings and created pastoral staff positions for me. And basically, he gave me books. He just gave me book upon book upon book. And then he'd ask me, and we'd talk through them. He was just a really formative man in my life, and kind of building on something that my own father had done in my life. My dad was a pastor in Carrington, North Dakota for 30 years. Now is sort of semi-retired, but still engaged in preaching and teaching ministry. And my dad had done a similar thing for me when I was growing up, let me ask him theological questions and, kind of shoot the breeze on stuff that I was wondering about and whatnot. And so I'd kind of grown up in that. And then Monty just sort of furthered that experience in my life in really pivotal, foundational ways. And, so that experience, more than anything, far more than seminary did, is what shaped me into the kind of pastor that I've been and am, today. And it wasn't just me, but it was the other guys that were talking about the TPA at the beginning about 10 years ago too. Every one of them had a similar experience. With a guy named Pastor Steve from Madison, South Dakota, who's now serving in North Dakota, Steve Vetter, amazing guy for that, and other men that had done similar things. And so we thought, what sense does it make to take a guy who's got zeal for the gospel and a love for the church and a desire to grow and kind of margin in his life to study deeply and think deeply and drink strongly from these kind of theological and biblical wells? What sense does it make to kind of send him off to an academic incubator, which, again, seminary doesn't have to be that. That's largely, I think, probably left up to how individual students handle their time in seminary. But to send them off to an academic incubator for 3, maybe 5 years, incur tens of thousands of dollars worth of debt, and then and then kind of kick them off into the world of trying to find a church and all that sort of thing. What sense does that make when we as pastors could just model this ministry for guys in our churches and have an academic thing alongside that sharpens them in that way, and just recenter the whole experience to the church, which is what they're training to give their lives to. Instead of their connection to the local church might be really just tenuous in a traditional seminary context. If they're not driven, to find a local church, if they're not motivated to find a mentor when they're in seminary, that kind of thing, seminary can be actually, I think, an experience that cuts people off from the church in some, harmful ways. And so, again, it doesn't have to be that way. And there are probably some seminaries that do that and help students and resource students to do that better. And I'm really grateful for that. I know there are seminaries that are doing that today. And to that degree, I'm really grateful for them, and more power to them, and God bless them. The TPA is, again, like I said, just almost an entirely different paradigm, where we're saying, let's make the institutional stuff go away. Let's be about relationship with one another, partnership as churches and pastors, and network. Organic isn't quite the buzzword that it was 5-10 years ago, but let's have an organic experience that centers the entire process around the local church and in that context, rather than kind of the institutional side of things. And so That's, I guess, how the TPA is maybe different from a traditional seminary experience. That, and for the most part, you don't have guys with PhDs teaching your classes. We have one director who's teaching Hebrew and Old Testament exegesis right now, who's got a PhD from Southeastern Seminary in Old Testament. That's, if that's a high value of yours, that you've got guys that are kind of steeped in academia, that are versed in, that are going to hash through every last nuance of the synoptic problem or textual criticism or something. If that's a high value for you, the TPA probably isn't for you. We get into that stuff a little bit, but not deep into the weeds like you might in a PhD program or something like that. We're really looking to equip guys who are sort of, they're sold out for the gospel. They're sold out for the local church, and they recognize life is short. We're all going to die pretty soon, sooner than later. And when we do, what will have been, what will we have done with the gifting that God gave us? Will we have spent our lives, like Richard Baxter says, and the Reformed pastor, what is a candle for but to burn? Have we burnt? Or Paul says, I would gladly spend and be spent for your souls. If there are guys that they're like, who really feel that, and they're like, man, my life is short. I want to get through this with an absolute minimum of financial expenditure from a, Calvinistic complementarian perspective in my education, and steeped in the local church and these people, these everyday Christians who are the very bride of Christ around me, from little old ladies who pray circles around me to little kids to farmers to everybody in between, who I love and I want to see them grow in Jesus. That's the kind of guy I think that the TPA really, those are who our hearts beat for, that we'd love to see. So again, nothing against academia per se, guys that are more academically oriented, for whom a PhD or something like that is a really high value. There are avenues for that already. The TPA is much more about getting guys the training that they want, the training that they need to be effective vocational pastors in the context of the local church at an absolute minimum of financial expense. And so that's kind of what we're all about. And okay, I'm going to stop talking.
No, that's excellent. I'm glad you're talking a little bit about the philosophy there, but behind it, we had I'm going to say too much, but we had an intern from this seminary come for a summer between his senior and junior and senior year, and just came for 2.5 months, and we let him preach a few times, and just got to know him as well as we could, and in those months, and after he graduated, he went and became a pastor and at a small local church, and he would call me several times and ask me questions about hey, this is going on, how do I deal with this situation, I'm going to do my first funeral, kind of some of those questions that you brought up earlier that kind of are the reason why you do the things you do. And at one point, he said that there's just so many things that I did not learn in seminary, that I just feel like seminary didn't prepare me for. And I think that, like you said, it's nothing against seminary, but I think like a lot of programs, I was a high school teacher, right? And I didn't have an educational background. I had a Bible background, and I went and taught Bible classes, so I knew the material, but the classroom management part, I didn't have any education in that. And I just wish that, I wish I would have had some background in this. There was a lot they didn't teach me here. Well, come to find out, that's in even an education program, a lot of people go into the classroom and feel extremely inadequate because there's just so many things that they can't teach you in seminary. or in education or in seminary, and even seminaries that I think do try on that regard, have an intern program. I think that the seminary that we went to, right, you had to have an intern program with a church, and those things only work as good as the pastor and the student want them to. So I think there's only so far that a school can be intentional there, and so I do think there's a total difference in approaching how you prepare people for ministry. And like you said, it just kind of depends on where you're at and what you want. But I think people need to understand that this is a big option, and it happens in the context of the local church. And if we love the church and that's where we're going to serve, it does make sense that that's where a lot of our education takes place. But so some people would say, well, one of the reasons to go to seminary is because you get a degree, right? You get the MDiv after your name or whatever. Do you get an accredited degree? How do you handle degree credentials? How does that work, and does it matter, I guess?
Right. Yeah, the TPA does not grant a degree. We're not a degree granting institution. And so we want every student or prospective student, every pastor who's interested in being a part of the TPA network, want them to really be aware of that at the get-go from the outset. There might be a time down the road, maybe in a not distant future, I don't know, where that becomes an option that the TPA might be able to offer, but that has never really been a really high priority for us as directors or whatever. And so, no, you don't get a degree going through the TPA, and that's in some contexts that's a huge disadvantage. So if there are a number of churches for whom having a degree from a renowned institution or a well-regarded school or whatever is going to be a really important thing for their search committee, and so a guy who's been trained in the TPA style probably isn't going to be as attractive to that kind of church in terms of really being in the running for a pastoral position there or something like that. And so we want prospective students and pastors who are interested in the program to just kind of be aware of that at the outset. It kind of comes down to that philosophical difference a little bit there too, between the TPA and sort of more traditional styles of pastoral ministry preparation, where again, without kind of going back to my rant just a few minutes ago, the sorts of guys that are gonna thrive in the TPA, the sorts of guys whom this program is for, are guys that are okay with not having a degree. They're okay with putting in a ton of academic work, trying to learn Greek and Hebrew, writing gobs of papers, spending countless hours in academics and stuff on top of all their apprenticeship experience stuff. And they're not going to have a piece of paper at the end to show for it. Instead, but, and I will say, just as an aside, we've had, I said we've got 15, I believe, students who are active at some place in the program right now. And they have just, I've been so blown away by their work ethic, by the amount of stuff, just by the energy that they put into their classes. They're going for it. I mean, they are not goofing around. Last night I sat in on our symposium class that's going on right now, Old Testament exegesis and Hebrew. And I listened to guys talk through, one guy shared a paper on Exodus 21, 26, I think, or 25, I can't remember, where two men strive and hit a pregnant woman such that her children come out, and kind of a classic difficult text of the Old Testament. And he, gave a half-hour explanation of his exegesis paper that he'd written that examined this thing from every angle conceivable, from the Samaritan Pentateuch and the Septuagint and the Masoretic text and the variant readings, the different nuances of that. I mean, these guys are killing it. And they're not, we don't even give them formal grades. And sometimes I think, man, are guys really going to work that hard if they're not going to get an A, B, C, or D at the end of it or whatever? But almost across the board, TPA students, they have just gone the extra mile in terms of putting in the effort, because there's something. I think it's because there's something something inward that's driving and motivating them. Namely, they love the gospel, they love Jesus, they love the church, they love pastoral ministry, they love that call, and so they've got kind of a motivation from within that's leading into that. And so for them, maybe they've never told me, but maybe they'd prefer to get a degree at the end of things, but they're gonna do it anyway, and so those are the sorts of men that TPA is really attuned to and suited for, guys that they're gonna do it anyway. They're gonna find a way in a pastoral ministry. But so many of the TPA students have been, at least lately, the guys that have been coming into the program have been guys that are kind of in different stages of life, and there's no real obvious on-ramp into pastoral ministry. Kind of the traditional on-ramp where you get your bachelor's or whatever, and then you go off to seminary for another 3 to 5 years or whatever, and you get all this debt, and then you kind of begin the church hunt. Like that on-ramp, that traditional on-ramp is not where they're at. Some of them are, in their late 40s, 50s. They've got families, they've got children, they've got kids in seminary, and there is no way. But now they're thinking, I want to give the rest of my life to serving the church, but there's no way I'm going to uproot and go to seminary. There's no way I could incur the debt of that. There's no way I could. I've got 4 children, let's say. There's no way I'm going to be a full-time seminary student, and still provide for my family. There's so many men like that don't have kind of the traditional on-ramp, and the TPA, I think, helps or could help open up some of those doors for guys in those circumstances too. Not only in the more traditional route that guys would take, but other guys too. And so, we have one man who is from Wisconsin who had been Googling. We get a number of interested inquiries about the TPA every year from guys that I call random Googlers. They're Googling for pastoral apprenticeships, and the TPA is like the first hit or one of the first hits they find or whatever, and it's kind of interesting to them or whatever. And so this man was just fine. He's 41. He's got 5 children. He's got a successful business. He's heavily invested in his community, but he feels this burning passion to sell almost everything he owns and get into pastoral ministry, like to turn his back kind of on the American dream, as it were, and live for teaching men and women and children the gospel and the Bible and shepherding and discipling. But he has no clue how to get into this, especially from his particular circumstances. I remember one of the first conversations I had with him on the phone. He inquired and said, he told me, when I found the TPA and I read through the website, I literally wept. I wept for joy. Like, this is what I've been looking for years and didn't know it existed. So to this man's eternal credit. He and his family are in the middle of a relocation process. They're actually moving to Del Rapids, or to Baltic, South Dakota. He's renovating a building that our church owns in Baltic into apartments. He and his family are planning to live there, but he and his family have made unbelievable sacrifice now to come and do this, which I mean, those are just the sorts of guys that the TPA seems like it's a good fit for, and it's just a little bit different than sort of the traditional route, but that's kind of how we like it.
Yeah. There's definitely a bit of a paradigm shift in your thinking when it comes to pastoral training. I mean, I don't think people think that, well, there's not another option there. And
you know,
John, go ahead.
Well, I think that, you know, if we're getting into training for the screen there is funny. Maybe it's not to you guys, but anyway, if we're getting into training for the piece of paper, maybe our motive isn't correct. It should be, you know, it should be to be equipped, right? And so it seems like the TPA is going to find people that want to be equipped, and I think that the TPA does that, and I think that's why our church got involved with TPAs. I think it does that. It equips men for ministry. So,
yeah, I guess I put you in the hot seat, John, because I was going to ask you, you know, what was it that ultimately made you a decision as a pastor to throw this idea out to some of the people in your congregation that were interested in pursuing pastoral ministry or deepen their education.
Yeah,
you have a couple guys, right, in your church that are involved in this already?
Yeah, I have a couple guys. One of them probably, he's not sure if it's vocational. Right now it's non-vocational. That could change in the future, and the other guy's in his 60s, but he wants to take classes, and he wants to give himself to being an excellent elder. And so he wants to take classes, and they're both in independent study classes right now, really diving in and studying, and it's really encouraging. And then we're planning a church in Uganda, and the pastor there is actually in the process of application as well. And he would be more of a full-time type situation, from what I understand. And then I have a couple other guys that are talking about it as well. So we're really excited. We're really excited about it. Yeah, I think it's a good program.
Yeah. Well, good. You got any other questions there, John?
No, I think we've gone pretty close to an hour here.
Yeah.
We've got a lot of mileage out of Ryan today.
Yeah.
It's been good. I think I think if anybody has any questions, they can contact Ryan personally. I think he'd love to talk to anybody.
Yeah, I serve the TPA as a half-time administrator. I'm the only technical staff of the program. Like I said, we are decentralized, church-based, relationship-oriented, and so we have 6 directors. I'm one of the directors, but then I serve the TPA part-time as an administrator. So I process, help the admissions process, and just talk to interested prospective students, interested pastors who are interested in seeing their church become a TPA network church. I try to be kind of that point of contact for all that stuff. So I'm really, really happy to talk with anybody who wants to know more. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much, Ryan, for your time today on kind of short notice too, and we just really appreciate that. I'd say this is one of my favorite episodes so far.
Absolutely. Thank you guys. Yeah, appreciate the opportunity.
All right.